Hello everyone. So while I was browsing Reddit, I have a problem I know, I came across this post in the Iron Lung subreddit, and I instantly knew I had to make a video on this, because I love the Iceberg format and I always wanted to talk about Iron Lung. I just didn't get a good reason for it. So without further ado, let's descend into the blood ocean of a mysterious alien moon. David... wait a second.
Szymański.
Shamansky, okay. So this is the guy responsible for the entire Iron Lung experience. He created the game and also voiced the radio operator here at the start. He made a bunch of other games that are also released on Steam, and most of them are horror or horror themed. He's also involved in the making of the upcoming Iron Lung movie, which we'll talk about later in the Iceberg. Blood Oceans. According to the terminal that got added in the 2.0 update, there are 4 of these blood oceans. One in AT5, the moon where the game is set, and another moon, Z8. The other 2 moons are unidentified. If you type in blood oceans in the terminal, you'll get this entry. An unexplained phenomenon that has been identified on 4 separate moons since the Quiet Rapture. Moon AT5 and Moon Z8 are the most notable locations as they are under the control of the COI. Enough research has been conducted on the blood itself to determine that it is indeed human blood, but we have not discovered where it comes from or how it keeps its liquid form. The ocean on AT5 is of particular interest because... You'll notice that the reason here has been redacted. I assume it has been tampered with, and some information has been classified because it would probably cause too much unrest in the remaining surviving population, which leads us nicely to the... The Quiet Rapture is the titular event that occurs in the lore of the game. Basically, it was a cosmic event that happened 21 years before the start of the game, where every single star and habitable planet, including Earth, got blipped out of existence, and only space stations, spaceships, and barren moons were left. No one knows what caused this, and those few who are still alive speculate of its mysterious origin. The terminal entry reads: In 357 EIC, without any prior warning, radio contact with our respective planets was suddenly cut. Nobody can recall having visual contact with any planets when the incident occurred, or experiencing any other unusual phenomena, so it's uncertain what exactly might have happened. Upon investigation, it was observed independently by several stations that where there had previously been planets, nothing remained. Further investigation over the following months revealed that all known planets with sentient life, flora and fauna, a habitable atmosphere, or any sort of natural resources were likewise gone, along with all known stars. The only celestial bodies that have been found since are either uninhabitable moons or asteroids. Many theories have been proposed for this disaster, including religious interpretations of it as a literal rapture, some unknown quantum anomaly, or something more cosmic and sinister. There are no concrete answers yet. Points of interest. There are exactly 10 points of interest in the game, excluding the other Easter eggs and places where weird events happen. This is pretty much the goal of the game, as you have to take a photograph of every single one. The reason for this whole thing is explained by the briefing you get at the start, which reads: 2 weeks ago, we conducted an exploration of Moon AT5 for the first time since the Quiet Rapture, leading to the discovery of a 4th blood ocean. A trench beneath the ocean's surface has several points of interest. In short, the Consolidation of Iron wants a visual of those BOIs. What's the Consolidation of Iron? Good question. The Consolidation of Iron, also known as the COI. It's an organization that consists of 3 space stations and 2 spacecrafts where democracy rules. That and iron and steel that was used to create its 2 main stations. It was created right after the Quiet Rapture, and it used to have 4 space stations, but one of them, Filament Station, got attacked by Eden. We'll get to what Eden is in a bit. And the station was rendered inhabitable after a 9-day battle. Along with Eden, it's probably the last remaining semblance of civilization left in the universe. Lore update. So, most of the backstory and lore that we have from the game came from this update, which added the COI terminal in the back of the submarine that allowed you to enter specific keywords and get the relevant entries. It also included this ominous line: "There's also something new to find out in the depths of the Blood Ocean." This alludes to something we'll find deeper in the Iceberg. The SM-13. This is just an alternate name for the Iron Lung, the submarine that you play in for the duration of the game. It was a burner submarine created by the aforementioned Consolidation of Iron for taking deep-sea photos and analysis. Contrary to what the terminal entry mentions, it was not designed for this expedition, and so it has been welded shut to avoid implosion. Its terminal entry reads: one of 4 in-service underwater crafts fashioned by the COI for use in conviction realization in the blood oceans. It is designed for deep liquid photography and analysis. All rumors of the SM-13 and similar crafts being used for so-called mob justice by way of forced suffocation or otherwise have been proven false. Beyond the Veil. This is an achievement in Iron Lung obtainable by getting all other achievements. From the name, I assume it either refers to a physical, tangible veil that the player crosses, or maybe it refers to how the player finds out the truth behind the events of the game, like the mysterious Quiet Raptor in the Blood Oceans. The letter on the floor of the Iron Lung mentions this too. This is not an expedition, it is an execution. When they put you here, they don't want you to return. And even if you do, and even if they keep their promises, what freedom awaits for you? A few dying ships in a sea of dead stars. If there is still hope, it lies beyond the veil. Hope in this void is as illusionary as the starlight. I will choose to breathe my last here at the bottom of an ocean, unseen, unheard, uncontrolled. They will get their execution. I will get my freedom. This was left by a previous convict, and he hopes for a different future beyond the veil. Maybe he means his death, maybe he alludes to an afterlife. Who knows what lies beyond the veil. Moon 85 and Z8. As mentioned before, there are 4 moons with blood oceans that are known, and 85 and Z8 are 2 of them. The former is the one you explore in the game. It's of great interest because of the large trench that it features and the many points of interest that you find there. It's basically a moon-sized execution chamber for convicts. More on that later. Alright, now that we've dipped our feet in the ocean of blood, let's see what lies underneath the surface. The oxygen is a scripted event. Throughout the game, there's this oxygen indicator that shows how much you have left, and it keeps decreasing the longer you're there. Or does it? Yeah, it's not really dependent on any time you spend in the sub, but rather scripted and decreases based on certain events. There is this response from the dev which confirms it too, stating that it would soft lock you if you weren't fast enough. Hopefully this doesn't ruin the suspense for people, but nope, it's not a timer. I felt that having it as an actual timer would be more distracting and annoying than anything, especially since that would mean soft locking you if you weren't fast enough, and having to replay from the beginning, which I thought would undermine the experience a lot. It's not necessarily supposed to trick you into thinking it's timed, but more just be another way in which things are going increasingly wrong as you progress. And when I was playing, I assumed that it wasn't timed anyways, because there isn't really any way for you to keep track of how much the player plays and to make it adaptable. Eden. Remember that battle that we briefly talked about that happened against the Consolidation of Iron? Well, this is the entity that started it. Eden is the largest human government that still exists after the Quiet Raptor, and originally it was a space station for Mars, something that its inhabitants deemed so important that they made their own calendar surrounding it, calling it the Interstellar Martial Calendar and using it instead of the epoch of interplanetary colonization that everybody else used. More on both of these terms later. Earth is redacted. What I think this is referring to is that if you enter Earth into the terminal, you don't get an entry, which is pretty weird considering you get one for Mars and the other organizations. It's mentioned in the wiki that the Mars population exceeded Earth's, probably because Earth started to become uninhabitable, which leads me to think that maybe relationships became sour with Earth and they decided to cut off all ties to it, removing it from the database as well. The moons are alive. This is a theory made by some people that states that the moons are living beings, like an entire living, breathing creature. I personally don't think so. The ocean of blood probably came from a different source. Either it was teleported there by the Quiet Raptor, or just so many humans got absolutely squeezed to death that their blood managed to amass an entire ocean. It may seem far-fetched, but with the right numbers, that type of thing might be possible. Out of bounds. There are people who manage to reverse engineer the game and access the area outside its confines, which reveals a lot of interesting things, like the fact that the Iron Lung submarine doesn't actually move throughout the game, but instead it's a tiny camera, and that the photos you take aren't pre-generated, but are actually taken from the 3D map world. It's a pretty cool series of videos. I've linked them down below if you're interested. The last photo. On a normal playthrough, you would never get to see the last photo you take, because the jump scare with the frogfish thing happens before you get to see it. But since you can take the photos of the points of interest in any order, you can just go to it before the last one and discover that it's a wall with 3 windows and some weird looking spikes or coral on the floor. The windows definitely indicate intelligent design, and that there were people who created these structures and maybe used to live in them. Filament station. I'm just gonna read the terminal entry for this one since it sums it up pretty well in my opinion. Filament Station was the 4th and largest space station in the CUI until 362 EIC, when tensions between the CUI and Eden erupted in a 9-day battle on the station. The conflict battle ended unresolved when Eden troops resorted to sabotaging the station's reactor, resulting in a critical breach. The breach left Filament Station uninhabitable due to high levels of radiation, and it has sat empty since. Prisoners taken during the conflict have been undergoing conviction realization in the years since, with the final ones expected to repay their debts and integrate into CUI society by 381 EIC. Profanity alert. This one is not on the Iceberg, but I thought it included just for the lols. If you type in the F word or one of these words from this not very comprehensive list, you get this entry. The CUI expects everyone in the collective to maintain a standard of polite and acceptable behavior. Please consider your language and attitude before interacting. Thank you. Someone else died in the Iron Lung. Remember that note that was already in the submarine when you entered? Yeah, well, that belonged to a previous convict that was sentenced to die in the Iron Lung. And here you are, soon to face the same fate. The Humming Monolith. This is an Easter egg that's located in a little cove that's in the right of the last photo, shown here in the map. It's not a point of interest, so it's not required to finish the game. It looks like this and emits this eerie noise. It probably has some significance and maybe wasn't discovered on the radars of the Consolidation of Iron, as the other 2 structures that emit a sound in 85 are points of interest. If you ask me, it's probably still sending out a signal of some sort back when the civilization on the Blood Moon was still thriving, and nobody's there to answer it. The Iron Lung movie. So, this is an upcoming movie starring none other than Markiplier for some reason. The teaser trailer was released on his channel. It's about a minute long and features the intro voiceover along with a slow transition to a more updated Iron Lung model. There's also this comment which is pretty funny. David Zemansky, the game creator, is of course heavily involved, but the writing and financing is provided by Markiplier, along with some screenwriting assistance from Zemansky. Also, he stated that the film is, quote, a separate canon from the game, at least for now. I hope they flesh out the lore and the universe of the game, but still try to keep the creepy elements of claustrophobia and thalassophobia that the game instills. Sinking Iron. So when I read this at first, I thought it was referencing the original game somehow, but upon further research, it turns out it's a fan game made by Lixium, the editor of Markiplier. So I downloaded it, played it, and wow, that was truly one of the games of all time. Basically, an earthquake happened, some people with a submarine investigate, you go down, defend yourself from the constant attacks of a Cthulhu-like monster until you resurface. I liked the gameplay, it was stressful, and I was startled a couple of times, but the voice acting was god-awful, and the game ran like ass. Maybe it was just my machine, who knows. Decent fan game though. The Blood is Human. This is confirmed by the terminal entry for Blood Oceans, which states that the research conducted by the CUI confirms that it is indeed humans. A lot of theories made by the community try to explain why it's like that, but the ones I tend to agree with is that somehow after the Quiet Rapture, the creatures that disappeared were all concentrated in one area, through teleportation or some other means, and got the ever-living shit squeezed out of them. Maybe billions of humans were killed in this rapture and the moons are their final resting place. Game achievements. There are a total of 7 achievements for the game. Spatial awareness, which just as you crash into a wall, this also causes a game over screen. Freedom, where you have to read the note that the previous prisoner left. Not a whale, you get this one after taking a photo with a skeleton, which on a normal playthrough would be the 4th anomaly you find. The skeleton is believed to be of a similar species to the creature that keeps harassing you throughout the game. Question mark, question mark, question mark. You get this after photographing the 7th anomaly, which is this star-shaped light beam at the end of this tunnel. We'll get back to this thing later, it's kind of important. Beyond the Veil, acquired after finishing the game. Burner subs. This is further down the iceberg and we'll talk about it in detail then, but you get it once you enter SM8 in the terminal where you receive its entry. You played this before. You get this after taking a photo of the normally inaccessible 9th anomaly. Mars. In Iron Lung, Mars plays a pretty important role as the first colony outside of Earth was made here, established in 1992 AD. This means that the universe of Iron Lung is very different from ours, it's on a completely different timeline. So they developed technological advances that were advanced enough to send them to Mars and even make a colony there. As mentioned before, Mars grew to surpass the population of Earth before the Quiet Rapture, likely because Earth became less habitable and people were dying in masses. After the Rapture though, the only thing that remained of Mars that was still alive was the space station Eden. It's kind of interesting that the Quiet Rapture only affected people or creatures that lived on planets or moons, but not the spaceships or space stations. It feels more and more that it's been done by a sentient entity, not just a natural cataclysmic event. Conviction realization. This is basically a prison program that the Consolidation of Iron did to its prisoners following the battle at Filament Station, and basically realized them by making them perform tasks such as repair or maintenance. In this case, the player is undergoing conviction realization and has to take deep sea photos for the COI. The COI would have you believe that this is actually better than just executing you, but it's just that under a different guise, since the subs that they send the prisoners down in are absolute garbage. Its terminal entry reads: a humane form of criminal justice used by the COI, where crimes are repaid by rendering services to the general collective. Often this is by performing surveys, maintenance, or other similarly beneficial tasks. In addition, in the SM13 entry, there is this interesting line that the COI includes to defend any claims that its method of handling prisoners is in any way inhumane. All the rumors of the SM13 and similar crafts being used for so-called mob justice by way of forcification or otherwise have been proven false. The SM8. This one's actually pretty interesting. So if you go down the other way in the last cave and head to these coordinates and take a picture, you're greeted by a destroyed submarine with the label SM8. If you enter it in the terminal, you get this gigantic entry. Hopefully they don't redact this before updating the database. What most people don't understand is that not all subs are built equal. The SM8 isn't a burner sub, it really is for exploring and surveying blood oceans. If they send you down in the Iron Lung, they don't give a fuck if you come back, or the sub comes back, because it's a pile of garbage and you're a piece of shit. You come back with photos, great. You sit down there and suffocate quietly, even better. But if they send the SM8 down, one of the scientists is piloting, and they all expect them to return. And now the SM8 is in the blood ocean in pieces. No, not hit rock pieces or sprung a leak pieces. It looks like something tore it up. And the weirdest thing is that nobody else seems surprised. We might have found the first planetary life since the Rapture, and they're acting like it's no big deal. I know you're next in line for realization in the Iron Lung, and usually that means you won't be seeing the stars again. But they don't have an SM8 anymore. They have 3 burner subs, and a lot of curiosity about 85, and maybe that means you have a chance. What I like about this one is that it's very clear it wasn't written by the COI, and it was probably written by the same person who wrote the note on the floor. It's assumed it was destroyed by the same monster that attacks you at the end. There's this picture of the submarine out of bounds, which gives you an idea of its general appearance. You are a convict from Eden. I've been saying this throughout the Iceberg before this point, but it's accepted that the reason you're on the Iron Lung in the first place is you were among the prisoners that were captured during the 9-day battle that broke out at Filament Station, between Eden and the Consolidation of Iron, and you're a convict serving your sentence among the fishies.
Alright, you'll be sleeping with the fishies!
Mods. There's basically one popular mod for this game, and that's an exploration-based mod. I found this one on Nexus Mods, and it's called The Last Navigator. It's pretty cool if it's your second playthrough and you want to explore the world in depth. It adds in a forward and rear facing camera, increases the sub speed, among other things, and reduces the margin of error when taking photos. Negative reviews. If you go to Steam and look for negative reviews on the game, you can see some pretty hilarious stuff. The top ones are all related to the recent Ocean Gate fiasco, which is pretty funny if I do say so myself. But there is some criticism if you look further down. They mainly don't like the jump scare at the end, but I personally loved it. Also, some guys didn't get the gameplay, but I don't know. It was the whole experience and mystery that made it for me. It's a game that's larger than the sum of its parts, and it should be regarded as that. The world, mystery, and tension I felt throughout the game intrigued me, and I think that's the main selling point of the game anyways. We have almost reached the bottom of the iceberg, and trees should be getting a bit weirder now. Frog. This refers to the monster that attacks you at the end of the game. It's been referred to as a frog since it sort of looks like one. It's referred as that in the game files, but it looks more like an anglerfish to me. I looked up frogfish images, and I don't know, maybe there is some similarity. I also found a theory at the bottom of the comments of the wiki page which mentions that in real life, patients who are in an iron lung, which is an actual structure that simulates breathing for people who have lost control of their respiratory muscles, must use a method to regulate oxygen called frog breathing. Coincidence? Yeah, probably. Or maybe not. No. Or iron lung Roblox. So I didn't expect a lot out of this. Roblox games aren't really known for their outstanding quality, but this remake actually surprised me. I tried playing through it all on my own, but it was like 1 AM and the iron lung experience is mainly something to be played once and then keep pondering about. The gameplay stays mostly the same, but there are some weird changes to how the bearing and movement works. First, the bearing isn't actually working properly and rolls back to -180 when you reach it, which is kinda funny, and the movement is a bit finicky. You know, I went to check back on how Iron Lung did it, and I immediately got why this game stuck with me so much. The atmosphere is just perfect from the first glance, the submarine is just the right size, and the graphics are just the right level of pixelated to let your imagination run wild. Anyways, the terminal is included, and the POIs are mostly the same except for this absolutely terrifying tentacle monster one. I really wish something like this was in the game. Maybe it's a bit obtuse, but it works so well alongside the fish sighting because it's just so otherworldly. The monster that attacks you at the end is different, and is now more like a leech with 1,000 teeth than the one in the original game. All in all, respect to the developers, a solid remake which improved on some aspects, but ultimately broke a lot more along the way. Oh, and one funny thing that happened to me while I was playing, I hopped in with 2 other people and the experience turned multiplayer, which was fine, I guess. I mean, you didn't come here to get the actual Iron Lung experience, so sure, why not multiplayer? Thing is, the guy that I foolishly trusted to pilot the sub crashed while I was looking up at the consolidation of iron on the terminal, so that was a good scare. Never trust other non-professionals to pilot subs, people. Never. The Iron Lung icon. This is yet another entry that's not on the iceberg that I've taken the liberty of adding. I always wondered what the icon of the game was supposed to be, because it didn't seem like it was alluding to any specific monster. My best guess is that it's supposed to be the whale skeleton thing from the game, but blurred and rotated somehow. It must have some significance, or else it doesn't make sense using it as the icon for the game. You can see it here in the Steam page as the main banner, and I assume those are teeth, so yeah, it's probably the whale skeleton. I guess in hindsight it's a decent icon for the game, as it gives off an air of mystery without revealing any of the actual horrors that are in it. This was going to be the end of this entry, but one Reddit user with the handle everojida08 made the connection between the test point of interest and the icon and the thumbnail, and they fit perfectly. I asked this in a previous post on the subreddit, and the community delivered. Okay, as the astute among you may have realized that this is the same person who made the iceberg, and it's kind of funny that I only discovered this while I was writing, so yeah, well, there you go, fun fact. Okay, back to the video. Burner subs. The term burner sub is mentioned twice in the game. Both are in the SM8 entry in the terminal. What I understand by the term burner here is that it's something that's easily disposable and not meant to last a long while. It burns away. The SM8 wasn't a burner sub, as it was actually designed to withstand the deep sea pressure to conduct scientific research, but according to the entry, there were 3 of those. We know that the Iron Lung was one of them, and I could swear I read something about an SM1 at this point of interest, where you look for it. I may be imagining things though. The other burner sub I don't think we have any information about. OceanGate memes.
This is the steering stick. You use that for steering. These buttons do... I don't know what any of these things do, to be honest.
If you had just seen it up there, the ship rode on the wind, and they...
Somebody go get it.
After the OceanGate sub imploding almost 4 kilometers below sea level, a lot of memes sprung up from this situation, which is actually the first time I've seen so many memes being made on such a tragic accident. But I guess it was because of the ludicrous $250,000 that they paid to go in that death coffin, and the disdain towards billionaires who just hoard money. I'm not going to go into more detail, but right around the incident, the number of people playing Ironlung increased by a lot. And the developer David Germansky, I'm just going to keep calling him David. And the developer David even said on Twitter that it's something concerning. Personally, I find it pretty funny, but my sense of humor isn't normal to begin with. There is 3 other blood oceans. So we know there are 4 moons, 85, Z8, and 2 others we don't know their names. They all have blood oceans, and they're all moons. There may be some correlation here, but I don't think so. I think it's because the moons were just small enough to avoid the quote-unquote detection range of the Quiet Rapture, whatever that means. And somehow the human blood that was aggregated from all the deaths piled up there. I would really like to know the source of the human blood. It's driving me crazy, but I guess all we can do is speculate. What caused the rapture? Before I get into this, I saw that this question had that upside down question mark at the start, and I thought it was just a quirk the maker of the Iceberg made, but it's also present in every other question, so I can safely deduce that the person who made it speaks Spanish. The powers of deduction. Anyways, Quiet Rapture. There are a lot of theories that try to explain what happened. Here, they speculate that it's the heat death of the universe. One thinks that the Quiet Rapture was caused by the squirrel stapler god. No, I will not explain what that is. And there's this theory which I like, which states that instead of the stars and planets being blipped out of existence, it was the opposite. And the space stations were, quote-unquote, raptured away to another mirror hellish dimension. What I think, though, is that there is no solid answer. And not even the author thought of it. And while that may be disappointing, I don't think it hurts the story in any way. Some things are just meant to be taken at face value, and in creation stories, or the start of a new disease, the outcomes of that massive cataclysmic event is more important to the events of the story than its reason of existence. Take the zombie outbreak in The Walking Dead. I've been watching that show a lot recently. They never once explain what started the disease, and they didn't for 10 seasons. I didn't watch the final one, maybe that changes. But ultimately, it isn't important. It can lead you to speculate and theorize, which can instill a sense of mystery in the story. But in the end, it's what unfolds after said events that matters. That's my take on what caused the Quiet Rapture. And I'm not saying to stop theorizing or speculating, because there is probably no concrete answer, but just that the point of it is to speculate, and you're not meant to get a full and complete answer anyways. Eden has the last existing trees. When we previously discussed Eden, this was mentioned. It's kind of interesting to note this because trees usually are the main providers of oxygen, and if Eden is the only one that has them, shouldn't it be the only one left alive? I'm assuming that's not the case though, and the CUI has another way of generating oxygen, maybe through filtering CO2 or some advanced chemical reaction. It does give Eden more power though, and maybe even some protection, because if the CUI were to attack it, it would risk destroying those last remaining trees in its garden. Iron Breath. Yet another entry which I didn't recognize at all, and turned out to be a fan game. Funnily enough, this game was in iOS only, and I fortunately had my shitty iPad Air lying around, which came to the rescue. This thing is 10 years old at the least, but it still manages to back a punch. Whenever I play these remakes, I try to put myself in the perspective of the people who made them, who loved the Ironlung experience so much that they just had to try to replicate it on their own, and spend who knows how many hours recreating it in Roblox or Unity or whatever. It's pretty cool to see the effects this game had on people. It starts with a very scuffed AI voice line which is just beautifully worded. The gameplay is the same, although the sub is a bit bigger than what I like. It's never small enough for some reason in these remakes. There's a noticeable lack of a terminal, which I understand, it probably wasn't worth it to add for the developer, or actually, maybe they remade it before there was even a terminal, because that was a pretty recent update, now that I think about it. Anywho, one change that I like is that the sub actually moves, meaning while you change the angle, the sub changes in real time. It's slightly more immersive. The sound effects are a bit more jarring here, but I like them nonetheless. There's this weird whale noise and a beeping sound that plays constantly, which I think is meant to be the sonar. If you crash, there is more leeway in this game than the original, and you can survive a few hits before you die. When you do though, blood starts to rise from the floor and you're hit with this screen. I tried to take a screenshot of it the first time around, but I was immediately hit with an ad, which didn't help with the immersion, but I got a good laugh out of it. All in all, if I was a 10-year-old kid with nothing to play on his iPad, I would have probably enjoyed this, and maybe it would have stuck with me as one of those old mobile games that we're nostalgic for today. Depths 7. This is a Gary's Mod Workshop mod thingy. I don't really know the term, but it seems to be heavily inspired by Ironlung. Its description talks about carrying over an operation with an abandoned submarine recording footage of points of interest. I didn't really play through it, mainly because I don't own Gary's mod, and because I didn't feel like it. Link in the description if you want to check it out. People in the comments seem to like it. Worms or pipes? I'm assuming this refers to this point of interest with the pipe-like structures with the stripes. Some people theorize that these are not static structures, but rather living, breathing worms or leeches. To be honest, I'm inclined to say the same. Of course, it's not impossible for naturally generated formations to appear like this, or even have intricate designs, and with the composition of the ocean or the rocks surrounding it, who knows what may form naturally. But it seems like this could be some sort of camouflage for these hypothetical worms to hide themselves from a possible predator, although they do stand out in hindsight. Or maybe they are pipes made by an ancient civilization to transport liquid around. Both possibilities are really intriguing, but I think the former is more possible, because if they were pipes, we would have found way more of them as infrastructure. Who knows? This is all merely speculation. This feels so wrong. I mentioned this back when we were talking about the OceanGate memes. It refers to the tweet that was shared by David, the creator of the game. This feels so wrong, along with a chart showing that the unit's soul had a major spike right around when the OceanGate submarine incident happened. He further says, quote, "I definitely see the dark humor in this whole Titanic sub thing. It's just, like, I made Iron Lung the most nightmarish thing I could think of, and knowing real people are in that situation right now is pretty horrific, even if it was their own bad decisions." End quote. He also shared this, which I strongly agree with. We ain't gonna find any aliens down there, and if we do, we should have probably left them alone. OST inspired by Doom 64's OST. The soundtrack for the game takes inspiration from Doom 64, as shown by this tweet. It has an original soundtrack by me, inspired by Aubrey Hodges' work on Doom 64. It's about 1 to 2 hours long and focused on dread and rising paranoia, but there might be a few scares or two as well. I love when artists cite where they got their inspiration to make their work, as I do it myself, and it really shows the effect art can have on other people to make more art. The soundtrack is chilling, beautiful, and fits the mood of the game perfectly. Go listen to it on its own, it's very worth it. Deep Descent. This is possibly my favorite custom addition to the Iceberg. While I was looking up the soundtrack for the game, I got this on my recommended page, an Iron Lung fan film. This instantly reminded me of something similar that was made for Papers, Please, and I was very excited. So, the game begins with the text that the game starts with, to set up the world and everything, then the descent and the operator over the radio. It's 3D animation, and very well done at that. One criticism I have is that the main character's movements don't look very realistic, but it didn't detract all that much from the experience. As a game, Iron Lung barely worked, since the gameplay was so bare bones, but as a film, it's even harder to make it entertaining. This succeeded though, because it broke it up with a lot of interesting stuff. At one point, the prisoner just gives up and lies on the floor of the submarine, which was really striking because he finally realized he wasn't meant to survive in this thing. Then he goes over to the terminal and looks up COI and filament station, indicating that he probably participated in that battle and wants to know what the COI thinks of them. Then, surprisingly, he looks up trench walls, and I was expecting nothing to turn up because it's not in the actual game, but surprisingly a completely original entry showed up, and while it's not canon, it's still a very welcome addition. It reads, "Eden troops resorted to sabotaging the station's reactor, resulting in a critical breach. The breach left Filament Station uninhabitable due to high levels of radiation, and it has sat empty since. Prisoners taken during the conflict have been undergoing conviction realization in the years since, with the final ones expected to repay their debts and integrate into CUI society by 381 EIC. The trenches are long, narrow depressions on the seafloor. These chasms are the deepest parts of the ocean and some of the deepest natural spots on Earth. Recent note, 2377. Some walls are not what they seem." After this, he seemingly heads straight through a wall. That was pretty dumb in my opinion, but I think he managed to go straight through it. If somebody else watched this thing and has a better idea, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Then this happens. I'm inclined to think this is a hallucination, and not something that actually happened, mainly because he was in this thing alone for a long time, presumably, and that does things to people. His psyche is probably already wrecked from him contemplating his own death. If it was real though, then that star actually managed to teleport him outside the sub, and there was another diver there with a flashlight. Pretty far-fetched in my opinion. He then goes to the final point of interest, and after flashing the camera a dozen times he gets nothing, and goes back. Sorry, I had to do that. It's interesting how the monster didn't break through the sub and merely trashed it around. After that we get my favorite shot of the film. A slow pan to the prisoner where we see him sitting on the submarine floor, presumably dead from asphyxiation. Then to a note on the floor, the same one you find in the game. This was the prisoner that came before you, his fate finally known. Overall, this is a pretty faithful fan film to the franchise, and I recommend to watch it even if I did spoil the entire thing. Shout out to the Indonesian team as well as Farabi Tofeq, who had the idea to base it on Iron Lung in the first place. Iron Lung Scratch Remake. This is Iron Lung, remade in Scratch. It's kind of amazing actually. There is a main menu, working voice lines, animations, crashing, not actual crashing. It's the whole Iron Lung experience. It's incredible how people manage to make stuff like this using these. If there's a will, there's a way. Oh, and the best thing is that the pictures are raycasted and simulated in real time. They're not pre-generated, just like the real game. And of course, here's good old Froggy in the end. Looks adorable. Fan-made remakes. There are a lot of remakes of this game, and I think we've already covered enough of them on this Iceberg already, and the next one is a remake anyways, so I'm gonna mostly skip this. There is a VR version of Iron Lung if you're into that. Corpse Ocean. Honestly, this might be the best Iron Lung-esque game I've played until now. I went in without much expectations, and at the start the game was sort of too relaxing, and not in a good way. For a moment I thought this would be a pretty relaxing experience. Then the glitches started. This is what I love about horror games. Stuff like this is bone-chilling, because we do not like it when something, even just a slight discrepancy happens. The premise of the game is that you are a submarine pilot on a mission to retrieve some organic material detected from a sunken Navy sub. You have this little computer that tells you your mission objectives and controls, and on one page it tells you that the objectives are classified. Your goal is to go to specific coordinates and look for these barrels, scan them, and move on to the next ones. After doing 2 of these, you're hit with a third prompt. Something is definitely off. The text is glitched and the depth is 0 for some reason. Definitely not the job for a submarine. For some reason when I first saw this, I unironically thought it was maybe a glitch with the game, because Unity games are buggy and I've seen this type of glitch happen in dialogue before. So this just added to the horror. I didn't know if it was real or if it was just a bug in the game. Anyways, as you approach the coordinates, this happens. This freaked me the fuck out, and it was the start of the "oh god no, I don't want to die" phase of the game. You're then given the next coordinates, and they're at the aforementioned sunken Navy sub. Although the game doesn't explicitly say that. There is no organic material to be found though, and there is a giant breach in the hull of the sub. What I think is that whatever thing that was in there managed to escape deeper into the ocean. There are 2 barrels here instead of 1, and after you get them both, you're prompted with the next coordinates. They're pretty far away, so I went on cruise mode. I realize I'm switching between second and first person here a lot, but just bear with you. I was left to contemplate on what just happened, and I started to make my own. I hope that spooked you as much as it spooked me, because that was uncalled for. After I arrived at the coordinates, I began the descent, and I was met with this. I absolutely love this. It's my favorite part of the game because this mythos is already established in a lot of other media, mainly Lovecraft stories about ancient fish people, and finding such a clear display of an ancient civilization immediately makes your mind race with the possibilities. I descend into the little hole here and follow the winding passages of the underground temple, finally reaching the end and catching a glimpse of this. It looks like it's an eye of some sort, opening with tentacles everywhere. The shape is uncanny though, and maybe it's more of a clam pearl situation. Afterwards you get this screen with a satellite image showing what seems to be an unidentified suspected sea mammal at redacted coordinates. It appears to be 40 meters tall. So, my theory for what happened here. The Navy sub managed to capture an unknown deep-sea creature that seemed to be dormant at the start, but it soon awoke and attempted to escape, breaking the hull of the submarine and leading to its crash. The sonars detected this and sent you to investigate, clearing the ocean of the radioactive barrels as you went. However, this creature, or thing, has some otherworldly powers, and it managed to take control of the computer in your submarine to direct you to where it wanted you to be. Maybe to actually scare you, or show you those things. My argument for this is that it leads you to its location, which is at a depth of 178, units are not given, which is beyond what this sub is capable of. I highly doubt the people that sent you for this mission would endanger you in any way. The satellite image in the end is that creature resurfacing, maybe either to feed or for some other purpose. All in all, this was a truly great experience that was made in just 10 days for a game jam. Great sound design, gameplay, and I just love how the game got darker and darker the more you explored. Kudos to developer Kira for making it. David's other games. David made a total of 7 games solo, including Ironlung, and 6 games that he collabed with other people on. I'm not going to go into detail into every game, mainly because that'll make the video egregiously long, longer than it is now, and because it's not really in keeping with the Ironlung theme. The most recent one is Chop Goblins, and this one was actually hinted at in Ironlung. More on that later. The most popular one of his games, other than Ironlung, is Squirrel Stapler, an educational horror game involving squirrels that pay tribute to old PC hunting games. It's part of the Dread X Collection 2, which is a collection of little games he made. I didn't play the game, but I do recall from a video that there is a squirrel god involved. Look into it at your own discretion. EIC and IMC. So originally this entry was much longer than it is now, but it was just filled with a bunch of uninteresting information. Basically, EIC is used by the consolidation of Iron and is based on the rotation of the Earth around the Sun, and IMC is based on the rotation of Mars around the Sun. There are 2 terminal entries that go more in depth about the details and how long the years are, but I don't think it's necessary. One thing though is that for some reason the trivia page for IMC mentions that the entry uses the spelling calendar instead of the more common spelling calendar with an E. This implies that calendar is a correct spelling for the word, but I looked everywhere and it appears that it's just wrong, a typo. I'm not sure what this is based on, maybe somebody got gaslighted by the COI into thinking this is a viable spelling. Who knows? Void. The word has a bit of significance in this game. The main occurrence which I think holds the most weight is when it's mentioned in the note the previous prisoner left. Quote, "If there is still hope, it lies beyond the veil. Hope in this void is as illusionary as the starlight. I will choose to breathe my last here at the bottom of an ocean, unseen, unheard, uncontrolled." In addition, if you look in the game files, you can see that the star-shaped anomaly is named Void. Maybe this could be the void that the prisoner is referring to, although from the note it's pretty clear that it's in a more of a metaphoric sense and not in a literal void. Also, void means completely empty and is usually associated with the color black and darkness. Having a shiny star named Void is sort of a misnomer. Could be intentional, however. Maybe something like the anglerfish mechanism, and it's a bright light that lures you in so you can meet a grisly end. Right now I think it's possible I'm looking too much into this, and maybe it's just vague for the sake of vagueness. Alright, we are finished with this stage of the iceberg, and are ready to sink deeper below into the depths. Frog is an ultra kill. In a secret level in Ultra Kill, an FPS shooter that's like Doom, but I'm only saying that so you know generally what the gameplay is like. You have to fish. You don't get any guns, but a fishing rod instead, and you can go to different water sources and catch fish based on them. Anyways, there's a lake of blood here, and you can expect that something's lurking in the deep. If you sink down below and cast your rod into the lower bloods, you catch this. It's instantly recognizable as the fish that attacks you in Ironlung. It's labeled as frog, and its description reads, a migratory deep-sea fish, usually only found on moons, though it can survive anywhere with enough blood. Very territorial, attacking anything that enters its domain and never leaves the deep. This is a very nice Easter egg to find, but I think it's just that. Probably no lore implications to be found here. Chop Goblin development screenshots. Remember that game that David made that I mentioned earlier? Well, it was hinted at in Ironlung, but not directly in the game. Rather, you have to go to the game files, and in a folder labeled No Really Secret, you get these 2 images, which are titled Chop and Chop 2. These are development screenshots from back when he was developing the game, and are a pretty cool find. The COI knows what's down there. The Ironlung was sent down to 85 for the purpose of reconnaissance, to scout the area and look for the points of interest and get a visual on them. We assume that the COI needs to know more about the moon, but there's a theory that states that they actually do know what's down there, and they're sending the sub basically on a suicide mission. This is mainly because of the SM8 sub that was found. The sub probably lost contact with the COI after being destroyed by the monster, and maybe they sent you just so they could get a better look at it. The submarine teleports. The sub you play in teleports a total of 2 times. First when you're getting this point of interest here, and are exiting when you're teleported to the center of the wide open area here, and the second near the star-shaped anomaly, and again when you're exiting. Those 2 teleports were very jarring when I first played, and I was confused as to why I wasn't in the same position. They're also convenient for the player, as you don't have to traverse those tight walls a second time. The lore reason for this probably harkens back to the star-shaped anomaly, as it's the likeliest source for these teleportations. I don't know how it would affect you all the way here though, when you're teleported for the first time, and why you only get teleported in these 2 instances. Maybe it's random, maybe it's not. There are less than 1,000 humans left. So the only civilizations that we know exist in the world of Ironlung is the Consolidation of Iron in Eden. As far as we're concerned, the people living there might be the only ones left, and they're not a lot. In the Consolidation of Iron entry, it mentions that at the time of writing, there are 257 people on the 3 space stations. Combine that with the people living in Eden, which is a larger count of 468, you get a total of 725. An abysmal amount, which is pretty scary considering they're the only ones left, and have to repopulate what's left of their now barren, dead world. There are 2 monsters. There are 3 encounters in the game which indicate that something is alive in the Blood Ocean. First is when you take a picture and get this horrific sight, second is a repeat of the first but in HD, and the third is when you get attacked by the first. Some people speculate that the second monster that you see in the camera, the giant eye, is different, because it doesn't quite resemble the other monster that you meet. It has scales and its eye isn't the same shape, but I personally think otherwise. It's possible that the model of the frog is just a limitation of the 3D art style and lack of pixels, while the 2D image that you get allows for more detail. Having 2 monsters doesn't fit in a narrative sense because it sort of detracts from the effect that only one mysterious creature exists in the Blood Ocean. It could be possible that the developer intended that they're different, but it just doesn't make sense in my opinion. The game takes place in 2370 AD. So we know from the terminal starting screen that the last time the database was updated was today, 5378. Since this is the Consolidation of Iron that set up the terminal, it is using EIC system, which has 0 EIC at 1992 AD. Add 378 to 1992 and you get 2370 AD. Though it may seem that this puts things into perspective as to how developed humanity is when the event of the game started, if you recall that 1992 AD was when the first colony on Mars was created, it means that people were capable of doing that all the way back in the 90s. So who knows how developed they were in general. So this conversion to AD isn't very relevant in my eyes. They're probably just even more developed now. Removed points of interest. I looked everywhere for anything on this, YouTube, Reddit, even the second page of Google for God's sake, until I looked up cut content and found this single entry. It talks about how the humming monolith, that Easter egg that emits that weird noise we covered earlier in the Iceberg, was probably a scrapped idea for a point of interest. So yeah, it probably was intended to be a POI because it's so elaborate, but it was removed for some reason or other, and Zemanski decided to keep it anyways. Yes, I'm pronouncing it like that. Sorry for all the Polish people. Nintendo Switch port. Apparently there is a Switch port of the game that costs $6 and is almost identical to the PC version, with the addition of a keyboard to the terminal so you can actually type stuff. It was developed by Zemanski, the same dev who made the game, and published by DreadXP. The one thing that stood out to me is not the port itself, but all the comments about the game. Many people didn't get it, or thought it wasn't for them, which I guess is understandable. Ironlung isn't exactly a thrilling bullet hell or intense action RPG, but I guess it's either because the audience on the Switch isn't the same as on PC, or it wasn't advertised as well. You could probably know my stance on the game just by the fact that I'm making a 55-minute video on it. Cool port. Don't think it was necessary though. Oh boy, we're almost done with the Iceberg, but we still have one more part left. The Abyss. Development screenshots. If you go looking around in the game files, you'll find a folder called Goodies, which has a development screenshots folder with a bunch of screenshots from when Zemanski was making the game. It's super interesting to me to see the inner workings of the game and what was the point of view of the dev when making it, because I also use Unity and I could understand most of the stuff he used there. There are a shit ton of image effects scripts, which makes sense as the game is highly dependent on those. There are also some images of how the sub used to look like before the final version and an old map. In the spoilers folder, you can find more stuff, this creepy ass frog pic staring at you, and some more behind the scenes of the map, like the whale skeleton and the buildings. When looking at these pictures, the game might lose some of its charm for some of you, since you know its inner workings and you realize it's just a game. But for me, that didn't really happen, because the development screenshots in the game are so divided that you don't really think about those on a second playthrough, mainly because of how immersive the game is. Given the genre of the game too, horror, the out-of-bounds aspect also adds to that, rather than detract from it, especially if you view the frog model here, which just looks even more grotesque with the stretching. Spin and Shoot. Also in the game files, there's this folder called Spin and Shoot, which has this little arcade game that David made with his brother when they were young. It's pretty basic, you move around and shoot waves of enemies and gain a high score. The reason it's here of all places is because he never found a chance to upload it anywhere, so it became an Easter egg for people to find. Kinda neat. What happened to the uninhabitable planets? If we look back to the Quiet Rapture entry, we can get a better sense of what happened. So all the planets just blipped out of existence. Radio contact was cut and nobody noticed anything unusual prior to that. The two theories trying to explain what happened here is that somehow the gravitational pull that kept them to their systems was gone, because of the stars also disappearing and they floated in space, but they couldn't find any evidence for the planet's existence afterwards. The one that probably is more true when taking into account David's game's history is that some sort of ritual was conducted which summoned some otherworldly unexplainable force that removed all of the planets. You can't explain it using science and logic because there is none. The Quiet Rapture could be the goal of that supposed ritual, or it could be an experiment gone horribly wrong. There is something breathing inside the building. There are many walls and buildings in the game that look to be man-made, and there are two which are points of interest, seen here. I couldn't really find anything on the breathing aspect of the buildings, so I asked the person who made the iceberg, and by his account, if you go into the buildings, you can hear this sort of breathing sound that can only be heard there. I couldn't go check myself because I didn't feel like playing up to that point of the game, but that is a thing that exists, and if it's true then it has huge ramifications. Maybe there are more things living inside the blood oceans than we originally knew. Possible prequel/sequel. In the lore update post that David made on Steam, there's this little section at the end titled What's Next. It stands well on its own, so I'm just gonna read it in full. What's next? I don't plan on adding any more lore or major content to Ironlung after this, but for those who have been asking, yes, I do plan on revisiting the world in the future. I don't know whether it will be a direct follow-up or a completely different game set in the same universe. I have ideas for both, only time will tell. And then there's this apparently Trello board where it just says further ideas. And the last line says, thanks again for all the support and stay safe out there in the blood ocean. I think that while David probably did plan on making a sequel to the game, I think that's been delayed by the upcoming movie. But what he said here does sound very promising, and I really hope he does follow up on that. Just judging by the number of fan games and remakes that people made, they really want more to the story and world. The thing that passes by your sub. I lied. There are actually 4 encounters with something in the game. If I remember correctly, while you're heading for the second to last or last point of interest, you're met with this quick beeping sound on the radar and then it vanishes, like something just passed by you. There are no walls or obstacles near where it happens, so you can safely assume that it was living. Thing is, with this one, I'm less inclined to directly say that it was the monster. Maybe it was a stray fish that got detected by the sonar, although that wouldn't explain why there's only one of them. If it was the monster though, why didn't it attack or show itself in this instance? Maybe it was scouting your sub, judging if it was a threat or not. I personally love moments like these in horror games because of how much little actual explanation you get for them. Something got detected by your sonar, good luck figuring out what that shit was, and you keep speculating for a long while after. If you're almost gonna die, if it was a scripted event, and if there are more like it. You're just left there to stew in your own paranoia for minutes at a time, and every single sound, whether intended to scare you or not, stresses you anyways, until you're just hoping for a release from this hell, and escape from the constant torture you're experiencing until the jump scare happens. It's not cheap, it's not fake horror, it's justified. The build-up is immaculate, and the payoff is well worth the experience. Thank you so much to anyone who stayed through to the very end. I hope you've enjoyed this insane deep dive on the lore of a little indie horror game that persisted in the minds of many people who played it, including me. Until next time, take care and don't stray too deep into any ocean, be it made of blood or something else.